This is the Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we are overcoming average. Welcome back to the Hard Thing Podcast. This is the podcast that helps you overcome average, step up above mediocrity, all by doing hard things. The goal of this podcast is to help you step through, past, over, under, in between, or around the hard things that are standing right in front of you, in between you and a better life. You see, going through hard things will make you better people, which will give you better lives. But we can go into all of that. Basically, the show is about improving your life. And if you haven't gotten that, it's because I haven't really explained it very well. Anyways, but today's our conversation show, so you're going to hear from me and a guest. Before we get into that, a couple of announcements. So first announcement is about Operation Underground Railroad. So the Hard Thing Podcast is actually trying to raise $1,000 to donate to the nonprofit Operation Underground Railroad. If you want to help us out, go to gofundme.com/overcoming-average. But really to help you understand what they do, they are a nonprofit organization. They go undercover and rescue kids who are slaves, kids who are stuck in sex trafficking, kids who are being stolen. And they actually have a text reminder out that goes out and tells you kind of, what's going on. And they have two. One's just for general updates. One's for prayers, asking for prayers. And in the last week, I got 3. I'm going to read the first two. And hopefully this gives you an idea of the kind of evil that OUR is trying to eradicate, that we can help eradicate by donating some money. So I got this text. It says, a 3-year-old boy was trafficked in East Africa to sell his blood and body parts. Please pray as he is fighting for his life. And then immediately after, I got, a 12-year-old girl had the same thing done to her last week and didn't survive. Prayers for her family would also be welcomed. If you want to sign up for these texts, go to OURrescue.org, get involved, but really help us raise $1,000 for them so that way they can rescue these kids who need so much help. It's very important, and they need all the help they can get. Next announcement, go to our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/The Hard Thing Podcast. There you can connect with like-minded people, brothers or sisters in arms who are trying to improve their lives, who are going through difficult things or trying to do difficult things, and maybe you can help or maybe they can help you. It's a great place to find some support, and in these COVID-19 pandemic days, all of us need support. Next announcement is, who doesn't like free things, right? Everyone likes free things. So if you want to get a free audiobook, you can go to audibletrial.com/The Hard Thing Podcast. Get a free audiobook. Why not? I know it's a quick announcement, but everyone likes free things, so why not? And also you can support the podcast by doing that. But anyways, let's get to today's guest. Today I am talking with Diana George, co-author of The Anatomy of Accomplishment, HR professional who's been in the business for many, many years. And we have a very interesting conversation today, all the way going from parenting to having difficult conversations in the workplace, how to confront someone so that way it's a productive discussion, how to really see potential in other people, as well as how to find jobs in this COVID-19 days. I found it a very fun conversation, very insightful, and I hope you do too. So listen up to my conversation with Diana George. All right. Well, thank you for being on my show, Diana.
I am happy to be here. Thank you so much, Justin.
You're welcome. And is it Deanna or Diana?
Diana.
Diana. Awesome. My mom's name is Diane, and we also know someone named Deanne, so I have to ask that. So,
no problem.
Let's start off asking the question I ask all my guests. Diana, what's the hardest thing you've ever done?
Wow. So the hardest thing I've ever done, and it may sound cliche, but the hardest thing that I've ever done is being a parent. Because for me, being a parent means so much that you don't have an idea of what that is before you step into that realm yourself. And so for me, that was about learning about selfishness, about learning about patience, give and take, sacrifice. And so it taught me so much that I did not know before, and it helped me to grow so much as an individual, but also knowing that I was responsible for someone else. and really taking that to heart. So I think that's been the hardest thing for me. My son, he is 25, he'll be 25 in October. And you don't always know if you're doing it right. You hope you are, but you don't know if you always are. And then there are those moments, especially now that he is much older and he's adult, and he thanks me for certain things. And, he takes a look at things, and I see him doing things that I taught him growing up. And then you realize, oh, I actually did do the right thing. And so it's a hard thing, because even though there's books, there's no right or wrong, and you don't know if you are doing it right. And so for me, that was the hardest journey, but it was something that I learned so much about who I was. I even learned about my potential. I learned about the things that I am capable of, and I learned about going that extra mile. And I learned about persistence. I learned about perseverance, and really never give up, because your goals are so much larger than even yourself at that point. And so for me, that was a true learning lesson, and the hardest thing I've ever done. And you continue doing it, because that's not something that ever goes away. Once you're a mom, and a parent, you're always that parent. And it doesn't matter whether they're, infants, or whether, they're teens, or now, grown adults, you're still that parent. And so you still have that connection.
Wow, I love that. And you're not the only person who has said that. Actually, early on in the podcast, I interviewed Dean Orge, a former Major League Baseball player. And when I asked him after talking with him, because back then I asked that question at the end of the show, he said he surprised me by saying being a father, and he has 8 kids. So I, 1 to 8 doesn't matter. They're all difficult. My wife and I actually just got a puppy, and it's nothing similar, but like, every day I'm like, wow, I'm not doing super good with this puppy. How am I going to do with kids and things like that? So I admire anyone who's a parent, because like you said, even now, my wife and I, in the future, we're going to have kids, but we're talking about like, how are we going to be parents? And like, all of this is just conjecture, because once you have kids, it probably all goes out the window, and you're like, well, we actually got to figure out how to do it for real. You did mention though, you learned about your potential. I thought that was very interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that growing up, and even as you go through life, that you can do certain things, or you feel like you can do certain things. And even people tell you that you can do certain things. But, in that realm, even as a parent, you have a different strength. And it's an inner strength. It's a protection. It's like, I have to do my best, because I have to not only do it for myself, but for someone else. And so then you reach into and you tap into that potential even more so. And all the things that maybe you thought or didn't think, or the fear, everything kind of goes away, because now you have something that's so much bigger than yourself. And so now you start to tap into those things, and you realize what you can do, and not only what you can do, those things that you're good at. And so I think that in life, sometimes we take it for granted, because when you're good at something, sometimes you have to put a lot of work into it, or sometimes it comes fairly easy to you. So you think that it comes fairly easy to everybody, and it's not the case. And so recognizing that that's a gift, and that you can really take that gift and really go in that direction. And for me, that really is about purpose. And you start tapping into the purpose, and the purpose that you have as an individual, recognizing that everybody's purpose is different, and you can't take a look at that person across from you and say, well, my purpose should be the same as theirs. It's not going to be. And so we have to find out what is the purpose for ourselves.
Wow, that's so insightful. And it kind of makes me think of Viktor Frankl's writings. And obviously, I'm not comparing being a parent to what Viktor Frankl went through, but he always talked about how, any suffering, it's just suffering unless you add meaning and purpose to it, then it becomes so much more, and it changes you, and you kind of use it to become a better person. I think that's what you're talking about right there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as a parent, I think that's the thing. You want to be your best for this individual that you brought into the world, that you're responsible for. But at the same time, you want to give them also lessons, so that as they grow, they can then be their best as well. And so you want to pass on something to them that they can use throughout their life as well.
Wow. And I'd imagine that those are a lot of lessons that you also translated into your career in the business world, seeing as how you've had multiple leadership positions, as well as being in HR, both things that I think deal with helping people, like you said, learn those lessons, but also, making them happy in the moment kind of a dichotomy between here and now, or in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What I love about being in HR and what I do, and for me, I stepped into HR by mistake. It wasn't one of those things that, okay, I knew. Because some people, they go into they're born, they start early in life and they know. It's like there's no mistaking. It's like, this is what I'm going to do, and they know. I wasn't one of those individuals. I knew based upon what you said earlier that I wanted, and I was connected to people in such a way that I wanted to help them, but I didn't really know what that was. I also knew that I want to be in business. So, where, everybody grows up and they have these different things. I've always imagined myself, being dressed in a suit and having a briefcase and going to work. That was my ideal mock-up coming up. And somehow or another, I wanted that to happen. I just knew that that's something I wanted to do. And so when I got into the business world and I started doing things, it's like, it's so diverse. There's so many things that you can do. But what I found is that I had this niche for not only helping people to be their best, but pulling out of things from them that they didn't even realize that they had, and that potential that I talked about earlier. And it's such a great feeling to be able to do that with someone and have them take a look at their inner self and figure out what is their purpose and how can they be their best, and they can show up and push them to do that. And then they start standing. It's like, once again, watching that child get up and, wobble and fall down in a few minutes and then get back up, and now they start taking their steps. And so when you can do that with people in their career, and then they go off and do all these wonderful things, and they come back and say, thank you so much for believing in me, that's the pay, that's the joy that you get from doing that.
Wow. And I can actually imagine myself having those same sentiments for certain people in my business career, and realizing how no worries, no worries at all. Just kind of how they've given me like a leg up. You said that you always knew you wanted to help people, and you always knew that you wanted to go into business. At what point did you know, and I mean, obviously you said always, but how did you know that you wanted to both help people and go into business?
You know what? Well, let me say this. First of all, I think that innately, as individuals, people, we all have a desire to help. But it's really going back to that purpose and finding out, how does that fit me and how can I really do that? So from a very early age, I mean, I've always had jobs, I always, whether it was babysitting or was doing, certain things, but I was always that person that even in a group of friends, and even now, I was that person that people would just come to and they felt comfortable talking to. And they would tell me everything. They would just tell me everything, and I would listen. And when they left, they felt better about it. And so you watch this and you're like, okay, I kind of like can do this, and it just became natural. And so I think for me, that was one of those things. But I've always had a connection to people. And like I said, when you're working with people, and just like a compliment, and just, seeing something in somebody that they don't see themselves, you never know the impact that you have on somebody in their day. And just, how a thank you or just an acknowledgement changes a person's perspective and even what it is that they're doing and just about themselves. And so I think that, a lot of times we don't acknowledge people enough. We tend to be so busy and we don't really see people, and when I say we don't see them, it's like, we have eyes and we're looking, but do we really see people? And so when you have someone that really sees you, there's a connection there, and that person knows it. And so that's what I feel like, I'm able to do. And so I want to take that and run with it. And so it's like, where can I really utilize that? And then it wound up being in the HR world. And part of that was because I worked in some corporate environments. I always speak highly of Bose Speakers, the speaker company, years ago. And they had a wonderful HR department that really helped me to tap into that. And even being a good manager and being a good leader. And so I was able to take that with me throughout my career. And so, like I said, I kind of stumbled into HR by mistake, because after a while, it's like, okay, I tend to do this a lot and I'm good at it. So why not just stay in this area?
Wow. What advice would you give to someone who maybe wants to develop the skill of, as you said, seeing another person, really understanding them and listening to them, who doesn't feel like they have that skill right now?
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful question. And you know what, it's something that I think that we all can develop. And if we develop this, and you'll hear me use the word intentionally, because I think that in life, when you really take a look at doing something and you do it intentionally, you'll have the result that you want. And so I think that we have to be intentional that when we're having conversations with people, we're all in. And by all in, I mean that we're there and we're not distracted or doing other things, because people can tell that. And so it's just like if you're a supervisor and someone comes into your office and they're having a conversation with you, or they knocked on your door and you say, okay, yeah, what do you need? And you tell them that you're there, but meanwhile, you're not really giving them the attention, or you're looking down, or you're writing. People perceive that. And so they don't feel seen. And so I think that we can do that by tapping into just being there in the moment with people whenever we're doing something, whatever we're doing, whether it's with our children, whether it's at work, no matter what we're doing, just put that time to be intentional about being there and just being there in the moment. And you will learn so much from that individual, just from listening to the conversation. And by doing that, you'll start to see people, and people will see that and recognize that for themselves.
It's so fascinating because, being there seems so easy, yet for some reason, so many of us just struggle with it. And ironically, like, we're recording this during the COVID-19, self-quarantining, which should be an opportunity for most of us to practice being more there, being in the moment. But I feel like a lot of us still aren't doing it. Why do you think it's so difficult for people just to be where they are and be present?
I think that because our attention span is very short to begin with, and so I think we have short attention spans. But I think also that it's a cover up. A lot of times, if we're not doing that, then we don't have to confront or really be in certain situations. And so just by being there, and you brought up a very good point with the pandemic, I think that a lot more people are doing it, and it's being done intentionally once again, because they didn't have a choice. I've heard over and over again from people just in terms of their family life and now spending time with their children and doing things that they haven't done in such a long time, and really seeing their kids for the first time because they're now home with them and they're there on a regular basis. And some people are coming out of this saying, you know what, once this is all said and done, I want to continue what we've been doing because they're seeing the benefit of it. But I think for a lot of people, if we're not really there, then we don't have to really focus on the things that we're not doing. And it's one of those things that it's easy for us to be distracted because we have things that's going on with our own self that we don't really want to focus or look into. And so if we're distracted or we don't have to really pay attention, it makes it easiest for us not to even confront that about ourselves. And it really is about being comfortable and starting to even confront yourself, because, when you can confront yourself, then you can start taking a look at confronting other things.
Yeah. And you use that word confrontation, confront a couple times. We were talking about that a little bit before we started, and I'm very interested because as you said, that's something you help people deal with, help people really kind of wade into and learn how to do effectively, being able to bring up tough subjects in a way that leads to a productive discussion. What are some ways that you help people do that?
Sure. So first of all, I want to just say, because a lot of the times we are under the myth that confront or confrontation is bad. And that's the way that we read into it, or that's the way that we see the definition maybe in a dictionary, or that we see it used so often. But really, when you take a look at it, confront means to be able to have any conversation comfortably. And if I can do that, I can resolve anything that's going on. And so being able to do that means taking a look and assessing that situation and what's going to be the best way that I can have this conversation so that I can get the result that I want. And so I work with a lot of people on this. And in fact, I just had a conversation just yesterday. It was with a young lady, and we were talking, and one of the things at her job, they wanted her to take on additional responsibilities. And I said to her, and she said to me, I'm not doing that. They're not paying me enough to do it. And, I'm just not going to do it. And I said to her, okay, but what do you want the end result to be? Well, I want a raise. I said, well, there's a couple of different ways that you can go about that. I said, you can have and say what you just said to me, and I can tell you that that's not going to go over very good. Or you can come with a different conversation. So a lot of times I think that people forget it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think that anything can be said. You just need to figure out, how do I say it in this environment that I'm in so that I really do get the result that I want? And so sometimes people go into situations very emotional, and I'll use another term, her. HER, human emotion and reaction. And when you're going into a situation with that human emotion and reaction, you can guarantee that's what you're going to get back.
Mhm.
But if I can go into a situation really with more of an analytical outlook on things, and I can bring up the whys, and I keep the emotion out of it, then guess what? People will hear me. And that's what I really teach people how to do. And it's just like, an angry person. You can have a person that's very angry. They could be very right about everything that they're saying, but does anybody hear the message? No, because they're angry and it sounds like they're angry. So they kind of like, okay, I'm not listening to this. So it's not, once again, it's not the message, it's how the message is given to the individual.
Agreed. I actually, I heard a story, two separate stories, I think. One, and this is kind of a little bit religious, but there was a speaker addressing a group of missionaries who were trying to spread a specific message, and he had a cake in front of him. And he said, brothers, sisters, whatever, there's a specific way you have to deliver the message. Who would like some cake? And one of the participants raised his hand, and the speaker grabbed a handful and threw it at the person who was in the front row. And he's wearing a suit and tie, and the cake gets all over him. And then he asks, "Okay, who else would like some cake?" And no one raises their hand. Finally, someone raises their hand. So then the speaker cuts off a small piece of cake and then hands it, and he says, "Okay, there's a difference. The cake is the same, but how you deliver it, that really changes the perception of the message." And I think that's exactly what you're saying right there.
Absolutely. I really feel that anything can be said. And I will tell you, in being that I've been in HR, I've had to do some hard things before, even in terms of, individuals and letting people go from positions. But I know that I am onto something. I know that I'm doing the right thing when someone afterwards will say thank you to me. Now, you have to understand, this might be a hard day for them. I've had to let them go in a position, but I really do make it about, this is just not the right thing for you right now. It's not a personal attack against the person, and just keeping it as such so that the person can take it. But then afterwards to be told, thank you so much. I literally have gotten calls afterwards from people thanking me because it was the best decision ever. And they weren't really ready to make it themselves. But because I approached it the way that I did, it gave them the opportunity to now move on to something that they were adequately suited for, and something that suited them better. And so sometimes people, when they're not ready themselves, they're asking for permission for somebody else to do things, for them. And I think that we have an obligation and responsibility. And if we can do it the right way, I think that we have the opportunity to help people just to be better. And I take a look at everything that's going on right now, in terms of the pandemic and, things that have been going on with George Floyd and all these other things. And I think it's just an opportunity for us to really see each other and to be more patient with each other and to really listen. Because I think that everybody has something to say. I don't always have to agree with you, but I should be willing to listen to you, to hear your point of view. And I think that when we start doing that, we can handle things, we can find solutions, and we can have the right conversations.
I agree completely. It was, another podcast I listened to, the host, really, he said that, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We all want to be able to go home at night, to be with people that we care about, have a little money in the bank, be able to do some stuff with our free time, and just kind of, like at the end of the day, we all kind of want the same thing. And I think when we get people talking and confronting each other in ways that you've described, in ways that they minimize their emotional reactions, so that way they can really see each other, understand each other, I think that's the only way we can really heal as a country. And, I love hearing people spread that message.
Absolutely.
But you also, I think you brought on a really important point. So you mentioned how you've had to let people go, and I've thought about my experience at my current job and what the HR manager has had to go through. They've had to let certain people go for various reasons or another, sexual assault and things like that. What things that like you really wish never would happen, right? And I think you showed one principle of how you go about having those discussions, in which you display facts, you state things as they are, you pull back your emotion. What are some other lessons you have for having those really hard discussions? I'm thinking of like, you're a leader and you have to talk to someone about how their performance is not doing very good, or maybe you have to let someone go. What are some principles that you use to guide you through those difficult discussions?
Sure. So one of the principles that I definitely think should be used all the time is that we should have discussions all the time. We shouldn't let things build up. And I think that's where we get into a problem, because things build up and one on top of the other. And this person comes in and then you just throw everything at them and they really feel blindsided. And I always say this: if you're a manager, or if you're a supervisor and you have an employee, they should never be blindsided at a review. They should never be. It should not come as a surprise to them. They should really know, because you've been having conversations with them all along, and maybe this is just a follow-up conversation. But if really, I'm having a performance review with someone or having a conversation and they are totally blindsided, then to me, that means I haven't done my job as a manager. I haven't done my job as a leader. I haven't done my job as a supervisor, because I have not communicated enough to that individual to let them know that these are issues or these are things that they should be working on. And so I've just let things build up, and then I've kind of said, okay, this is what you're not doing, and you're not up to where you need to be, and so now it's time to let you go, or we're going to put you on a performance improvement plan. All those things should never come as a surprise to an individual. And so if you're having those regular conversations, if you're doing it on a regular basis, the person should be enough in tune with themselves. And what normally happens is the person will make the decision themselves. They will realize, you know what? Ultimately, okay, based upon what the expectation is for me, because I keep hearing about the expectation, this is not something that's working out for me. And they'll come to you themselves and say, I don't think this is working, and I'm going to look for something else, or I'm going to resign, or they have that introspective for themselves. And I much rather, at the end of the day, have someone make the decision because they've had their own cognition, instead of me having to do it for them. But that only comes from having those ongoing conversations with people so that they're aware of it. And so, that's certainly a major thing. But I think the other thing is, as I mentioned to you, making sure that you're giving someone your attention and your time when you're doing that. And so that you're doing it in a way so that you're setting them up to win. And I think that any time that you're having a discussion, there should be a solution to something that you want to come out of it. And you want to try to set the person up to win at the end of the day. It is definitely a myth on the HR side that all HR people do is we just go around and terminate people. Because this is what I want to say. Understand this: finding good people is hard. So understand, our job is not to find people and then let them go. That's the last thing that we want to do. We want to find people and have them there. It's like what happens in the middle so that you really do get that. And so I think that, when we're thinking from that aspect itself, and understand that sometimes when you get a person, I've seen a lot of managers and supervisors do this as well. They want to find the perfect person. Okay, I want them to be absolutely perfect. But if I have the perfect person, then there's no room for growth or other things. So why not take someone that has all the potential, who has the things that fit into your company culture, that has the skill set, that you can work with them to get to where you want them to be. But you have to understand that's going to take some work on your part as a leader, and to find or think that someone's just going to come in and they're going to be perfect. You're setting yourself up for failure. And so I think that if we really understand that, when we have people come in and realize that we can get them to where we need them to be, we're going to have to spend some time with them. And sometimes people feel like, well, I got too much work to do and I can't do that. And what's the sense of me having them there? Yeah, you're going to have to spend a little time training them to get them to where you want them to be. But ultimately, you need to look at, down the road. What are we looking at? What's the long haul? What's the light at the end of the tunnel?
You kind of unpacked so many things there that I'd really love. First of all, I'm very appreciative that you mentioned that really anything that comes up in a performance review shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, just as an employee, having my boss give me a performance review, I mean, everything in there kind of, if he compliments me, it's like, okay, well, like it's a performance review. So he could be just saying that or whatnot. So I feel like having those constant touches and really getting you a gauge of where you are, that's exactly how you do it. And it's funny because I think that's probably the way you do it in parenting, in relationships as well, rather than just exploding on someone and saying, here's everything that I don't like, here's all the things you need to improve. Having that constant communications, that way they know you're being honest and genuine, but also, they're getting good feedback when they really need it. So I think that's really important what you said there. And then you mentioned you brought up the interview process, the team, creating a team, pulling people onto your team. And I think that is such a fascinating process, because essentially everyone puts their best foot forward, so much so that sometimes it's difficult to see who they really are, because their best foot is so far forward that, you know, it's not really an accurate portrayal of themselves. So what are some things you've done to really understand the candidates that you're working with, and figure out how they actually fit the culture rather than appearing to just fit the culture?
Sure. And that's important. And I want to say this as we're talking about this, because I believe that it goes twofold. And I don't think that people realize this. You know, the company is looking for a particular or a specific fit for the company, and they should be looking for someone that fits their company culture. But as a person interviewing and looking for a job and career, you should be looking for something similar also. What are the values that you have, and in the company that you're interviewing with, does that fit your values? So it should be an interview that's really happening on both sides. And so often that's not the case. And so when I go in there, number one, I try to make it a very organic conversation, because you said something that was very key. Justin, you said that everybody's putting their best foot forward. You're right. Everybody is. The interviewer is, the person that's there that's interviewing, the person that's, there at the interview. So how do you get to the underlying tones? How do you dispel or get past that social veneer that's there? And the way that you really do that is if it's an organic interview. Because when it's organic, then guess what? The person will feel more apt to show you who they are. But if it's that stringent, okay, I'm just going to ask you this question, and I'm just going to expect this answer. And so I really like to set the person up. Number one, I know that interviewing can be very daunting, and it can be, something that makes people anxious. So I really try to, eliminate that from the very beginning and make the person feel comfortable. I want to find out about them. And so a lot of my questions that I ask are very specific questions, because I want to dig deep. I want to find out who they are. And so one of the questions that I may ask a person is, tell me something that you're really proud of as an accomplishment in your life. It doesn't have to be, personal. It could be, it doesn't have to be professional. It could be personal as well. But for me, what that question does is it brings down the defenses of the person, because it's an accomplishment and they feel proud about it. And I can see as that person is starting to talk to me who they really are, because that's personal. And so you really now start to see more about the person. And so, there's things like that. One of the questions that I always ask of a person is, if I was asked your current supervisor, one of the things that you do really well, what would they tell me? And that's a question that for a lot of people is very easy to answer that question. But on the flip side, I'll also ask the question, if I was asked that current supervisor, what's the area of improvement for you? What would they tell me? And so sometimes people struggle with that, and they struggle with it for a few reasons. They're kind of like, okay, is this a trick question? Are they trying to set me up for failure? But no, what I'm trying to see from you is how transparent you're going to be. And also, if you're willing to say that this is an area, for you that you didn't succeed in, because understand this, I want you as an employee also that's coming in, I need to know that when you get to a certain situation, you're going to ask for help. And if you're not going to ask for help and I can't get that or pull that from you, I know that it's going to be a problem. So I'm looking for a lot of different things. But, the biggest thing is trying to find out who that person is, pulling from them and finding out what are their values. And what are the things that are really important to them, working on a team, what are some of the qualities that you want a team member to have if you're working with them? And understand this is a quality that you have as well as the people around you. So they're going to tell me what they want the other people around them to have, but guess what? What they're really telling me are qualities that they have as well. And so these are things that I, really go deep in, and I try to find out, because it really is, I think, crucial that you match, the culture of that company and what that person is bringing, because it's not just about skill set. You can have a person that has a skill set, but if they're in a company where their skill set does not fit with that company culture, guess what? They're still not going to do well. And so there has to be really that match on both ends. And that's where happiness comes in. That's where people are fulfilled when they go to work. That's when they really enjoy what it is that they do.
Wow. As you've spoken, I've just been thinking of kind of my own experience working on the team that I do. And it's just fascinating. Like, the whole business structure is fascinating, especially you have this interesting position where you exist outside departments, to help them fill within the department. So you, in your position, you've had to learn so much about all the different positions in the company, which I just find so fascinating. What are some ways that some things that you've done to really understand those other departments so that way you can actually help fill those roles?
That is so key. If you are going to be an on point human resource person, it's crucial that you do that. And that means that you have to get out your office. Being a on point HR person and being someone that's very good at HR, you will not get that way from sitting in an office. You have to get out, you have to be among people, and you got to see what's going on, because that's the only way that you get that. So, prior, when I was working in corporate America, the last job that I had, I was working for Omega, the watch company. I was their HR director for the US. And so you're talking about both retail and wholesale division. And so I knew all our divisions intimately because I got out there. I saw what was going on. I worked with the marketing team, the retail stores. I mean, it was nothing for me to be in the stores and see people and have conversations. And a couple things happen by doing that. You build relationships. And so it's not, when they see you coming, it's not like, oh my God, it's the HR person who's getting fired. Something's happening. Oh my God, fire, fire, fire. Yeah. It's like, oh, hi, you're here today. We're glad to see you. And so I really wanted to have that presence and more of that presence versus the first one that I just mentioned to you. So that I meant that I had to get out in the field, and I had to get to know people, and I had to know what was needed in the jobs itself. And so even the trainings and being there and, just immersing myself and having the relationships with people and giving them a comfort level to reach out to me and share certain things with me. And so, one of my favorite shows in the past has been Undercover Boss. And so that show, what happens is you have people that started companies, now they're very successful, but they don't get out amongst the people very much. And so they really don't even know what's going on in their own companies sometimes until now they're the undercover boss, and they learn so much. And I think it's the same thing if you're going to be, successful in, human resources, because you are dealing with people, you're dealing with connecting people, you got to know what's going on. Because if not, what happens is you just get a one-sided view. And you don't want to have that one-sided view. You want to be able to see things from all angles.
Yeah. Unfortunately, when you get the one-sided view, usually it's the one that you prefer the most. And you're already going to be more biased towards that anyway. So you're not going to dispute it. You're just going to be like, oh yeah, with the rose-colored glasses, everything's doing fine. And I love how you said you don't want it to be where you go out and people are like, oh, HR's here, someone's getting fired. And it's funny because kind of going full circle, I feel like sometimes that's how parenting can be a little bit too. When you ask your kids, hey, can I talk to you for a second? They're like, oh, what did I do this time? So what lessons have you learned? We talked about lessons from parenting that translated to HR. Now, what lessons have you learned in the HR and business world that translate back to parenting and relationships in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the things that for me in particular is just, once again, I said being there in the moment, but I think for me and being in corporate America, one of the things that I learned, important lesson also, is not to take my work home with me. Okay, when I get home, it's like I need to be there present, because remember I said part of being good and finding out from people what's going on is you're there in the moment. I think that lesson translates also when you get home. And so often we get home and we still have what's happened with work on our shoulders, or I got to do this, I have to do this. And so now you're in home and you're not present in your environment. And I have been guilty of that before, but I have a great relationship. And one of the things that I've always done with my son, even at an early age, I've always gave him that ability to vocalize and have that conversation with me. So when he literally says to me, "Mommy, you're not listening to me," when he was younger, I knew that was my kid. That was my cue. Okay, I have to stop. He's right. I'm not listening to him. I have to put this on the back burner. But there have been also times where I have also had to communicate with him and said, you know what, Mom has to do this. And what I need from you is just to give me half an hour. If you give me half an hour, then after that, you'll have my undivided attention. So it was that give and take. And so I think that also you learn that give and take once you get back home. And that has to be in any relationship that you have, whether it's professional or personal. It's a kind of give and take. And so I've allowed allowed my son that. And it's interesting that you said that, because that's one of the things that my mom, who's 81, just recently said to me. She says, you know what, I really admire the way that you've raised, my son, his name is Cain, her grandson. And she said, because it was different from the way that she raised us. And you learn things along the way. And I think as a parent, when she was coming up, it's kind of like you just did things one way. And as a parent, okay, do what I say because I'm the parent. And so I really didn't do that with my son. I mean, he's always had the ability to kind of vocalize things to me, tell me what's going on, and share. And I've always wanted to make it a safe space. So just like at work, I've made it a safe space for people to come and talk to me. I've made it a safe space for my son to always come and have the conversations, because I want him to come to me. I don't want him to go to somebody else to get answers. So really making it safe so that he can do that. And so, even at the age that he is, it's no problem for him to pick up the phone and say, Mom, this is what I'm going through right now. Let's talk about this, which I value and I love so much.
Yeah. Give and take, I think, like you said, is so crucial, just because, excuse me, just because so many of us are looking for like a rule, like do this every single time, but it's not that way. Sometimes you do need to put the work down. Sometimes you do need to work a little bit extra. And you also said, it's interesting, you said, don't take work home. And we're in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic. Basically everyone who could took their work home literally, and now they work at home.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a strange world we live in. So now, what are some advice you give to people so that way they can disconnect from work, even though they are at home when they're done with work,
And that is key right now. You have to set boundaries. You have to set schedules. For me, I have literally for the last 30 years, I've always had a home office. And so I work out of my house. So for me, it's been important to have another room. So I literally have a room that's an office. So for me, I get up every day. It doesn't matter what time of the day. I get dressed, I put on makeup, I do everything, just to walk into another room in my house, because I'm setting the stage for myself. But then on the flip side, once I walk out this room, then I'm in the other, and now it's all over. And I think right now, when you have everything that's connected and everybody's at home, scheduling is going to be so important. Organization is going to be important. And like you said, having those boundaries in that time. Mom needs, or dad, I need to work from this time to this time. You also have kids that's in homeschooling. So, I have to be honest with you, my hat goes off right now, because when I've seen some of the parents, you have more than one child, you have to homeschool more than one child, you have to work, you have to have all these computers connected and, Wi-Fi, because this one's on this one and this one's on that. It's just amazing all the things that you have to, but the only way that you can do that is through true organization and setting those boundaries. So now that you're at home and everything is being done at home and you're still working, also having those conversations with your organization that, at this time, I'm going to have to disconnect, because maybe that's the time that you're cooking dinner for your kids and you're having that family time. So it just doesn't roll, one thing after another. And it's like, okay, where does it all stop? And there's no separation. You have to have some separation in some of those things. That's happening during the course of the day.
I think that's so crucial. And like you said, those are just really good skills to learn in any aspect of your life that you're going to be in, whether it's parenting, relationships, business, or what have you. Setting boundaries, holding to those boundaries, and communicating those boundaries are crucial to being able to do what you want to do, but everything that you want to do, if that makes sense. So I think that's super important what you said. We're kind of winding down on time. I want to ask you one last question before we transition to the last bit of our show. In COVID-19, a lot of people have been laid off, let go from their jobs. What are some of the most important tips or principles that you'd recommend they do for gaining new employment?
Sure. So I just got finished teaching a webinar on this myself the other day. And so there's a few things that I would tell people to do right now. Number one, you have to be in action. This is a time, we are getting so much information, and it's time to just refocus, because that information has made us very dispersed. We've been all over the place. And so we need to just rein it in right now. So I would say kind of just refocus yourself, get back into, okay, let me just to cut out all the noise. Let's just take a look at what it is that I want to do. And in terms of that, be very intentional right now. There are over 1.5 million jobs that are posted on LinkedIn. We just had our president just announced just last week, there are 4.8 million jobs that have been put back into our economy. So that tells you that there is work out there. And so I think right now it's important for people to kind of regroup, reposition themselves, and now say, okay, this is the direction that I want to go in. If you're laid off right now, you should be dusting off your resume, taking a look. Make sure you're on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is the best thing for everybody to be on right now, because what LinkedIn allows you to do is it allows you to develop, connect with people, and develop relationships without leaving your home. So there could be a CEO that you want to get in contact with, or there could be a hiring manager that you would like to connect with, in a company where you would like to work. Well, guess what? You can make that connection with them on LinkedIn and don't even leave your house. So I would say right now for people, really take a look at your LinkedIn profile, make sure that it's truly up to date, make sure the settings are there, notifications, start connecting with people, spend your time doing that so that as we come out of this, you're going to have the momentum and people are going to know who you are.
I love that. Preach. Like LinkedIn for jobs is where you need to be. No other place can you really still get credit for just posting things about your industry. You can start to look like an expert just by saying, hey, here's a really cool article I looked at, and do that, for 4 months, every single week. People start to associate it. LinkedIn, I could go on. So thank you for mentioning that. But thank you so much, Diana, for being on the show. I've enjoyed it so much. Let me ask you the last couple questions I ask all my guests. Based on our conversation today, what 1 to 3 action items would you give our audience to do today or this week to improve their lives?
All right. So number 1, I would say find your purpose. You have to really find what it is that you are destined to do. Not what somebody else told you to do, not what, you think that you have to do right now, not even what you think is going to make me money. Find your purpose. Number 2, I would say be intentional, because when you're intentional in things, you will get the results that you want. So be very intentional and make sure that things are aligned, because alignment in life is key. Because alignment will put everything and it'll all go in the right direction. And 3, I would say get into action, because none of that won't happen if you are not into action. So get into action.
Excellent. I will put those up in the show notes. And then, Diana, how can our audience reach out to you, support you, and see what you're up to?
Sure. So you can always reach out to me at solutions at by George, and that's BY George, GeorgeHR.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Like you said, I'm on there. I'm very visible. I post articles weekly. You can follow me. I do definite webinars for people, because I do see that I have a gift and I can help people during this time frame, especially with work. So I've definitely been doing some regular webinars, and then on all your social other media platforms. And then certainly if you reach out to me at solutions at bygeorgehr.com, I will have a download of my book. I was an author in a book called The Anatomy of Accomplishment, and my chapter is on a company culture that transforms. And I share 7 strategies to have a winning company culture. And so I certainly would be happy to send people copies of that book.
Excellent. Awesome. I will put those all in the show notes, but thank you so much, Diana, for being on the show. I've enjoyed it. We went in a lot of places I didn't expect, but I thought it was really fun. Time passed so quickly, unfortunately, but thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I have enjoyed this immensely.
Well, there you go, guys. Another awesome episode and another awesome guest. I think one of my favorite parts about this podcast is really just getting to know a lot of really interesting people. Diana is so nice, and I wish I had her social skills, because the way she describes it, she just is able to listen to people, able to see people, which I found a very interesting phrase. And, I admire her social skills, because I'm more of an introvert, unfortunately, but I'm working on it. Anyways, it was a great conversation. A couple takeaways I wish that you'd have is that there are opportunities out there. I know in these COVID-19 pandemic days, it feels like, especially if you've been laid off or let go, there's no hope, but there is hope. There are opportunities. Get some action and start finding those opportunities and doing something with them. If you need help doing that, reach out to me at Facebook, or at The Hard Thing Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, as well as go to our Facebook group, connect with me and other people who would love to help you move forward in your life. Come back on Thursday for our Thursday meditation show, and just, subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. We're on all sorts of different platforms. And keep doing hard things, guys, because you will overcome average.